Okay, so this is a meeting of the ARPA Needs Assessment Committee. Wednesday, March 30th, 4:30 p.m. Actually, I'm going to call the meeting to order at 4:33. And the first item of business on the agenda is to amend the agenda if necessary and then accept it. Does anyone have any amendments to make to the agenda?
Are we going to be covering the survey, because it's going to be closing? Well, tomorrow it'll be closing. So are we going to be discussing anything about, what to do with the material and,
The survey on for next meeting just to get the last final responses, but I think we did talk survey responses in conjunction with our discussion of information gathered. So that would fall under 5D as well, if you wanted to discuss.
Yeah, because I was thinking afterward, once the survey closes, we're going to, present the information to the public.
Good. Good. So that will also fall under 5D. So we will talk about that tonight. Anyone additions to the agenda? No. I'll entertain a motion to approve it. Thank you, Barbara. A second. Glenn, all in favor, raise your hand. Any opposed? There are none. That motion carries. The next item is to approve the minutes from last week, March 23rd. I don't know why I wrote special meeting. I think it was a regular meeting. So those minutes were circulated earlier this week. And amendments needed to the minutes. And if not, I'll entertain a motion to approve. Thanks, Barbara. A second.
I'll second.
Thanks, Joe. All in favor, raise your hand. And if any are opposed, raise your hand, and there are none, so that motion carries. The next item on the agenda is public comment. Patricia, you can't see this. Lynn Worthington is here as a member of.
I can see Lynn.
Oh, you can, Alice.
Yeah, over the shoulder of Barbara.
You know what, would you mind, Craig just showed, would you mind if we squidge a little bit so that, yeah. So, is that chair okay for you to take the folding?
Yeah, I can just stick it with that.
Okay.
Right, yeah, fresh one. You want a fresh one?
Great, thanks. So, Lynn, as a member of the public, would you like to make any comment?
Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity. I have not been able to keep up with everything you guys have been doing, but I was able to watch your last recorded meeting. And I just did have a question, just so I can understand comprehensively. When are you gearing toward hopefully like presenting to the selectmen?
We're on the agenda for the selectmen's meeting in April. I believe it's in the 20s. It's like, what is it?
Oh, the third
week. Yeah.
Okay.
We talked briefly last meeting about whether we would present our report then or do a public forum. And I think that that's still a matter of discussion for this committee. But we have our deadline for when our report will be done.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, so let's move on into old business. And the first three are really updates. For the focus groups, you saw that Darlene Brady's notes are in for the nonprofit focus group. And I hope everyone had a chance to read those.
I saw them belatedly because it takes me a while to Google.
Okay. And then also one-on-one interviews, you saw that Barbara submitted her notes from her conversation with the fife and drum and how that was actually nice for Patricia and me to remember what it was like when we were ordering groceries from the Thyssen drum. Kind of a nice, an interesting reflection back on that time. And then tracking requests for funding, because since last week, we received a new request from the fire department, which you also saw was circulated and uploaded into the drive. And I imagine that Barbara's put it on the spreadsheet, or maybe not
I've
yet.
been busy doing this.
Okay, okay.
I
All
need
right.
to add that.
And then additionally, I'll forward it around to all of you, but I received a piece of correspondence today. It was not an official request. It was from the, I'm going to get the name wrong, the housing committee in town, saying that they had heard that there might be an application that nonprofits could make, and they wanted to be on the list of nonprofits that were invited. So that was all that communication was. Is there anything that we ought to talk about with any of those updates?
Anything that we need to talk about in terms of the updates?
Yeah, anything anyone wants to discuss, because I just had them on to recognize that those materials had come in, and then we can discuss them in the context of our larger.
Yeah, I think that makes more sense.
Okay.
The affordable housing communication, whatever, that came in
There's that
today.
one too.
Pardon?
There was that one too. There was a request from Jocelyn Ayers on behalf of affordable housing. That was another request that was circulated last week.
So
And I
when,
think that came in Wednesday night or Thursday morning.
when would we be able to see that one?
Oh, the one that, the affordable housing one went to all of us. So,
It's in the file now?
yes,
Oh,
that was last week. The communication that I received today, if you want, I can look at it very briefly, but it wasn't an actual request for funds. It was from Tegan Gabel saying Kent Village Housing for the Elderly, which is Templeton Farm. I just had heard that there may be applications for nonprofits, and if so, they would like to be invited. They want to make sure that they know if that happens.
that there's an application?
If that happens, that's what they want to make sure, that they are among our list of nonprofits. If we have a
They
list
want
of
to
nonprofits.
apply?
It sounds like that. Okay, so let's get into our discussion of the information that we gathered and our recommendations. We made really significant progress last week. As some of you have probably seen, there is a rubric uploaded into the Google Drive where we could do what Craig suggested last week, which was to enter what our beginning thoughts were on how the money might be apportioned among different classes. And I want to thank you, Barbara and Patricia, for anteing up and saying what you thought ahead of this meeting, because it was helpful, but I feel like we don't know from the rest of you. So I think that that's really where we should start, is Joe, Craig, Ruth, and Glenn having not filled in this rubric.
I heard you say that you might have trouble getting to Google Docs. So if you want to fill that in at the end of this meeting, I'll take it with me and I'll populate it for you.
Which I did, my understanding when we were kind of reaching a consensus at the end of the last meeting was, we're talking about 5 categories, or then where do you put the fire department? And I thought we reached a consensus on, we'll have 6 categories and we'll allocate it on a percentage basis. So then this came back with 9 categories, and it's easy to convert people's dollar amounts, like this is more for them, to percentages.
Right. I actually utilized percentage. I just put in the total dollar amount and multiplied by a percentage.
Okay, I was doing basically.
Yeah.
Come up with the dollar, but I wanted to make sure that I got all the dollars.
No, but both, so the reason, we kind of have the same number of categories is important, and then some of these seem to overlap.
Well, I didn't think necessarily that we were going to just decide on our categories and then just spread it out evenly. And so I think
I
that,
didn't
you know,
say spread
as,
it out evenly, just how everybody's working with the same number of categories, so you're not allocating 100% in the same manner.
when it came down to actually creating this, I found that I was not completely clear on what the categories were. And so I put what I thought were 5 categories that were definitely in what we were discussing. I put those right up top, A through E. And then I put other perspective categories because I felt like as I looked at the different things that we had discussed, that there might be other things that we ultimately would make recommendations towards. So
Okay, so why don't we just walk through it?
so, yeah, so that's why those are there. And
Okay.
then, you know, as you can see, that's what some people thought. And so I'm glad I did it that way, but I don't, you know, so,
Well, from the minutes from last week's meeting, I did understand that there were 6 distinct categories and they were listed out in the minutes. I was expecting to fill out numbers into those 6 categories. So I tried to, when I filled my numbers in on the chart, I tried to put things in what I thought were one of the 6 categories we agreed on.
okay, so municipal infrastructure, I know was in the minutes because I read it there. So let's make that F right away, okay? And
Make that
then
what?
let's make that F.
F.
So
Oh,
A through
okay.
F, that's 6. And
Well,
then,
actually, those were 2 different ones. Municipal and infrastructure were 2 different categories.
okay, so which of A through D does not belong?
So D, obviously there's mental health issues that need to be addressed, particularly given some of the notes in the social services thing, which are alarming. But that would, you know, like the town of Kent doesn't have a capacity to provide social services. We push people, and you can tell me better, but I think we direct people towards social services. We don't have counselors or other than at the school.
Okay,
So like that
here's what
mental
I
health, I
think.
would think would be
We
addressed
have
through nonprofits.
our own social service worker who does some
So
counseling.
she does some counseling,
Mhm.
one employee.
One employee.
So
And like a real mental health issue or substance abuse would be beyond. Or,
those are
Well-
provided by nonprofits.
Right.
And so.
She directs them to them, but she has done her own counseling.
Yes, that's true too.
Yeah,
So
I mean,
when,
on specific cases that come before her.
when you look at the requests that have come into us, there are 2 types of requests that are coming from nonprofits. One request is the same kind of request as we might get from individuals and for-profit businesses. I'm a nonprofit, and because of COVID, I wasn't able to hold my fundraising event, and so I suffered a loss to my income. Or I'm a nonprofit, and because I serve the public, I needed to buy PPE and put all kinds of safety procedures in place. And so as a consequence, I suffered increased expenses due to COVID. The other type of request that we're getting from nonprofits is, I am a nonprofit that is equipped to deliver services to people in the area of mental health and social services. And with your ARPA funding, I would like to provide a program. I think those 2 things are different. I think nonprofits are equally deserving of being able to apply for lost income and increased expense, and to provide programs to address the future needs, mental health needs of people in our community. So
I think this is a little circular.
I'm not quite, when the first category, are you saying for individuals who?
no, I'm saying nonprofits. Nonprofits as businesses might have lost income. And so the same program that would provide money to a business that lost revenues should be open to a nonprofit. But we also are receiving proposals from nonprofits that want to serve people.
Yeah, see, I see that more than the first one.
Well, but it's true that our if you read the
I mean-
nonprofit focus group Not all nonprofits received or experienced a loss due to COVID, but it's clear when you review the focus group notes that many nonprofits did. And they had to take out PPP, and they had the same issues that a for-profit business had.
Right, but I see it all as
Right.
one thing. I don't see it as
Well, so
separate.
like if you were the library perhaps, or I don't want to pick on the library, if you were some nonprofit that doesn't even exist, a theoretical nonprofit, and you knew that you were eligible for $10,000, up to $10,000 of ARPA funding, and you experienced revenue losses greater than $10,000, you're going to apply for that $10,000 to make up for your lost revenue. And why shouldn't you be able to apply for both so that our town gets the benefit of services?
Yeah, so I think we're kind of, it's a little bit circular here, so like we'll get this wrapped up, right? And do the great job for our town and do it efficiently. And I think if you're kind of breaking out the needs of nonprofits in two different ways, and you explained it well, that, you know, it's not, we need to like move forward. Well, so I'd say, like, you know, it's residents, businesses, nonprofits, and then nonprofits, then we're allocating within each of these. And one of the reasons on nonprofits get whatever percentage they get is because there's a real mental health issue. And so we can say these community nonprofits who address mental health issues should be, you know, consideration for a significant amount, you know, more than maybe others who don't need it as much. But let's keep our categories kind of narrow and then just allocate within the categories. And I think we can move through this a little faster.
I mean, I think that
My approach to this is at the last meeting, Craig's idea was to come up with 6 different categories. So I went with that. When I prepared something and I went with that information to categorize how I would break things down. So anyhow, when I saw this sheet, I was like totally confused because I said to myself, well, where on this sheet would profits be and where would local businesses be? So I didn't put any information on here because I was confused by this. Anyhow, I did prepare something, you know, some information that I could put on here. But what I was just the conversation now with I basically tried to like simplify things. And I, for the nonprofits, I didn't get into, you know, the mental health aspect of that. I just concentrated on the nonprofit itself to go into that particular category, you know, and I went along that line to as to how I would distribute things. So what you're saying, Connie, is the 2 different reasons for the nonprofit. One for their usage of PPE equipment, and one for their usage of income. Is that what you were saying before?
Well, you know, and what we ultimately do is a decision for this group. I'm just making a distinction between, I mean, look, let's use a nonprofit I work for as an example, the Kent Land Trust, which actually wouldn't apply, I don't think, for either of these pools. But the land trust is less likely than a nonprofit that, like Housatonic Youth Services Bureau, to apply for a pot of money that is meant to serve people in, you know, in mental health needs. So like, if we want to encourage the application of organizations that are going to provide reparative programming for our community, then it makes sense to think about that. And frankly, I don't think it matters terribly much whether we break it out into another category, as long as we recognize and make possible those two different, very distinct types of funding
So,
requests.
I mean,
So.
Can I say something? Can I say something? I think that
What we would
the-
do, one second, please, just while I finish my thought. What we would do is with the nonprofit allocation, we might allow nonprofits to apply for more funding than we would for regular businesses, because we were trying to address both of those different reasons that we would support nonprofits.
Well, right, but so.
But wait, now we have to let
Okay,
Patricia
so
talk.
that's, point of order.
Okay, so I think that the idea of allowing residents who lost money to apply for ARPA funds is fine. Small businesses, fine. I think social services and nonprofits have in several cases written comprehensive proposals. And I don't think we should create a big number for the category of nonprofits. I think we owe it to them to analyze each one and make a recommendation on the specific nonprofits, the specific social services, the specific municipal and infrastructure proposals that we've gotten, and address each one, recommend yes or no. I don't think that all the categories should just be a big number and, oh, send in an application.
The problem is, Patricia, we haven't heard from all the nonprofits. There are so many nonprofits that would apply if there actually were an application. So we do have a few, but that's nowhere near what we would have if we said to the nonprofits, make an application. And
Well,
it just
we
would
say that
not
about
be
everything,
fair.
Yeah,
everything.
right, I mean,
That's why we can't do this.
Then
That's
we
why we can't go
But I think we're
through.
gonna get into the weeds if we
Exactly.
start going into all that. You know, as you say, we have a deadline.
and we have a
need to-
system.
We have a system and we want to get this
Yep.
out there. Let's just do it.
Right.
Well,
So
it's-
I think your issues can be, like, we're gonna reach a consensus on more or less 6 categories. And then that's just a percentage or a big number. And then we'll allocate within that. And then as we have the allocate within that discussion, it might be, there's a consensus of, gosh, there's such a mental health need that we're gonna have to take some money away from someone. But I don't think we can like jump right into all the indivial applications.
I don't think we can.
We do
But it
have,
has to be culture.
we do have information for on mental health needs through the agencies that have applied. Through
But
the-
nobody has actually applied. We need to make that clear, and we especially need to make that clear because the member of the press is here. There is
you're
no
the press.
application process. Some people, some organizations, and some people have reached out to us outlining what they believe their needs might be. And in each case, we have accepted that as something that helped to inform us, but with the recognition that there is no application process and that we are not making decisions on individual applications.
We have requests in the file though, so I mean, going on the requests that we have, you know, you kind of have to assume that these people will eventually be applying. So going on that alone, there is information, requests from 2 nonprofits that are in there already. So I was using that information to kind of to include that the mental health issue in you know, in the funding.
But across, whether it's a nonprofit or a resident or a business, nobody knows, like a handful of people know there's some application process, and there really isn't an application process yet. So like by allocating it among the groups, then we can kind of step towards,
Right.
like the next step would be.
So let's
reaching,
try and
here's
pick
what the
our
percentage
6 groups. Okay, so I'm very sorry that I confused you by listing
No,
other
you-
things, but let's
it's
try
just-
and figure
That's
out
what I was hoping.
where, you know, because for each of Barbara and Patricia, they allocated some to municipal infrastructure and to help school-age children catch up on academics and to premium pay. And so do we want to just forget that those categories exist, or do we want to try and fit those into, like, do we want to say that help school age children really belongs with nonprofits and wrap that into that, or what do we
Well,
want to,
we
what
can
are
each
our
go
six?
around what we think, or, just, I'm the loudmouth on this issue, so I don't.
Could we have some discussion as to how these figures, how they were arrived at?
We're not gonna do
But
the
just what are
figures
the
just yet.
categories, right?
First, we're gonna figure the categories, because the figures,
Our personal opinions.
they're personal opinions, they're a part of discussion, they are a really important part of our discussion, but we can't be comparing apples to apples if we don't know what our actual categories are. And so
Didn't we agree on 6 categories at the last meeting?
Yes.
okay, so can everyone agree that A is an actual category?
Yes.
Let's try that. Okay, so individuals.
Can
B,
you read them? You haven't shared the
Residents,
document with the public. so-
It's actually on the.
and
oh,
you,
this-
no, it's not,
No,
the
it's
public
not.
is not, I
Can't
mean,
go to
these
Google.
are our proceedings.
I know,
and
but can you at least verbalize so somebody can follow?
I'll try to verbalize, but it's also, it's not really a matter for the paper so
I
much.
understand. I understand. It's just very hard to follow the discussion if you don't know what you're talking about.
Okay, so we'll go through, so it's,
Okay, 1.
residents,
It's aid to individuals who are residents
2.
Is aid to
small
businesses.
businesses.
in Kent.
3.
3
aid
is
to
aid to
nonprofits.
nonprofits.
And so can we have a consensus that the mental health is going, that will just be allocated into nonprofits?
Yes.
C and D
Okay.
will be combined.
Kent Volunteer Fire Department is gonna be its own category because it's so overwhelmingly popular in the survey. So infrastructure, different than municipal.
I thought we
which
did
is-
municipal / infrastructure.
Yeah, I know, I think we did go back and forth on that, we went back and forth in the fire department. And I think the reasoning to keeping infrastructure by itself is that it's in the ARPA funding thing, you have this, it's specifically delineated. There are certain infrastructure things you can allocate money to. And that would be different than giving money to the town to help KCF, the school, right? So the school would be within municipal. I think that's, so this is gonna be the one, right.
I
So
mean,
infrastructure seems like it would be its own thing. and
the
Okay.
that's-
So we'll make
reality
it
is
6.
that we found that almost anything that we wanted to direct money towards can be rationalized in.
Could we just?
But see, but it was sounded like Barbara had a different way of thinking about it on the municipal part, or you were just listening?
I was just listening.
Could we just go back to infrastructure for a second? Because when I was in my notes, when I was going through all this stuff, there was something there was one thing, at least one thing, that didn't really fit in. Actually, I didn't know which category to include it into. And that was the Northwest Connect nonprofit. There was a request in there for funding for infrastructure, broadband infrastructure. So would that go into infrastructure or would that go into nonprofits?
That would go into
Infrastructure.
infrastructure. If there's a real project, so
Yeah,
like, I
that's
don't,
questionable.
right, that's the thing is, when I first joined the group, it was like all gung ho and we know our potential new residents or actual new residents want improved, internet access and higher speeds, but we have really no way to actually deliver that, right? So then if that's why
Individual
you're,
towns are doing it.
but how,
And so we don't have,
right?
as far
And
as I
there's
know.
also
So
a
then
huge
what's the-
state project coming down the pike that's gonna address that for us.
Yeah, so
Okay, and then-
that, I don't even think that's gonna,
So then what is Northwest Connect proposing? That's the.
I don't know what they're asking for, did they ask?
There was a part of something from COG in there.
Oh, but
that was-
again, see Barbara saying that just came before COG and we're not gonna count all that stuff because it's my
Right,
understanding.
that was just a
That was
list to
thrown
let
out at a
everybody know
meeting
what
and,
we've
yeah, what do
gotten
you
in.
want and.
Because the guidelines, the final rule includes funding for broadband infrastructure.
Right, but there's a federal program coming down the pike. Connecticut's gonna get billions of dollars, and that's one of the things they're gonna address. So I don't think we need to even think about it.
Plus, it would be a.
Right.
I mean,
Yeah,
I
It's
did do a
huge.
little research on this when I first joined the group. There's this thing called Center for Rural Innovation, and they help small towns get high-speed internet. And we don't really even qualify because basically everyone has access to cable. Now, the cable internet we get is crappy, and but we're not in a, like, there's not a project we could allocate money to that would help solve that. And there were some things to accelerate 5G and use power lines to distribute internet, but none of it, it's just not real right now.
Well, that
That's
was
what
one
it's-
of the highest ranking things on the survey.
I know, but we just
That's a
don't have
wish
a
list.
project
There's
to
nothing.
give it to.
$800,000, which is our total amount of money that we're gonna get,
Would be
wouldn't be a drop in the bucket towards addressing that issue in here,
Well,
in
I
town.
know, but I mean, it's
there's no
like
point
a
in allocating
portion,
any money
you know, but
I
So
think
a give.
we could be more helpful giving it to giving a more substantial number to some of our locals.
And Joe, I looked, like, how could we use it as a starter? And there isn't a program
To designate.
that's actually, real life that we could allocate it to.
If at
Other
all
than, like, we could do
possible.
Wi-Fi in town, Wi-Fi in town wasn't popular on the survey. People want high-speed internet in their house for the most part.
I
We
think
can't
if
do it.
possible, we should really try and address things that were directly resulting from COVID, from the pandemic, and realizing that, the bipartisan infrastructure law and all of these other federal policies that are coming down the pike will make money available to towns to do general things that towns should do anyway, pandemic or no.
Well, internet infrastructure is directly related to COVID. Lotus have a Zoom meeting going on, and
Some
like,
towns did
wow.
use,
absolutely,
that, but-
absolutely.
but
If we
again,
could,
it's just not realistic.
right.
Okay,
I
so
wanted it to be realistic.
back to categories.
Yeah.
So categories.
Back to categories.
Let's go.
We know A, B, C, and D, which is the fire department, and we now have
Infrastructure is fine.
E, which is infrastructure, and we have
Municipal
F,
is
which
six.
is municipal, but that leaves
Including
helping
the
school
server.
children with academics and premium pay, high and dry.
Well,
Unless-
wouldn't
no,
premium
the
pay
school would
be
be-
under business?
That would be under
No,
business, yes,
It's not under business.
it would be.
No, because business one, I mean, unless we decide that we want to wrap it into business and give people business the opportunity to apply, not just for their losses, but to pay a bonus to their frontline employees.
Okay, I'll vote for that, so that,
I think the way to address that would be since we are going to make these such big categories, to say that the maximum amount you can apply for restitution for lost revenue is $10,000. Maximum amount you can apply for employee bonus, essential worker pay, is that, et cetera, so that they can apply under the same program for both if they qualify.
That's what I think we should, if we're doing that for, for these big categories like nonprofits, I think that we should make it clear in the application process that they might be applying for more than one kind of thing.
So that draft application that I put together, that one page, both sides, can certainly be modified to add a qualifier that lets people know that.
Okay.
And I also put in, since I'm just babbling about my templates, another template in the drive that I sent to everybody, I think, about the grant grant agreement. So people who get funds, they need to sign an agreement. And I put in a draft that I had crafted. I lifted language from, I believe, the Community Foundation in Waterbury to create that document. So it's mostly their information because they have created one. So
That
Anyway.
almost sounds like a contract. I read it over. It almost sounds like a legal
well,
contract.
it has to be, because if these funds aren't utilized in the way that they are specified in the final rule, and the federal government comes into town and determines that some of the end uses of these funds were not within those guidelines, we would have to pay the money back. So we need to be able to when we give the money out, explain to these people, you need to spend this money in this way that you said, or however we describe it. And we need to reserve the right to have accounting and to observe different things. So
Yeah,
that's why it's all there.
I think Craig brought this up at the last meeting, that there's nothing specified as to what kind of documentation the people have to
I
supply.
reserved the right. I reserved the right to ask for it later. This isn't going to ask for it, and we may never ask for documentation. Other than this does ask for a report. After 6 months after getting the money, they need to submit a brief narrative as to how the money was used. It's in this.
So, I read through the agreement, and I think it's much improved.
Well,
But I
that's
would,
the agreement. That's different from the
the
application
application,
that I
sorry, the
created.
application. And so then in the application, I would include just, you know, can you summarize the benefits you've already received? So PPP.
Do
payroll
we think it
protection
matters though?
plan, or-
I mean, are we gonna,
I don't think it matters.
I don't want, like, so you may not be aware, but there's many small businesses in our town that receive substantial payroll protection plan funds, which is, it's a loan, and then after you keep your employees for the period of time that's agreed, then it becomes a grant. right?
yeah, but then
But
they
that's
still
what I'm saying,
have,
so you wanna
they
know
still
that.
have losses on top of that, and we
Well,
read
maybe,
about
but
that.
It's only, but you
I mean,
don't
but-
ask how much they got, you don't know what it is on top of that.
But you're not
right?
gonna reduce
Right,
You
your
make the loss
award.
look
I
too
mean,
big.
basically, the whole purpose of those PPP awards was to keep businesses open, and that is also our purpose. That's what we want. It's, you know,
No
so
one's
it's not really
disputing-
a deserve or not deserve.
Right,
you
so
know,
the
nobody's
deserve
gonna
part is,
be-
that's what I'm trying to address is,
I
if
don't-
you already got substantial PPP funds, then that reduces your amount of need, because you already got that money. And so
Maybe,
it's worth asking
and
how
maybe
much you
not.
already got.
It
So
may
it's
not.
worth asking how much you already got. That was my only point, is that we should ask people what they already got.
Barbara was gonna be looking at these.
I have two things to say about that. The first is, if we're gonna ask them how much money they may have already received through other programs, are we gonna include a recommendation that that be somehow a qualifier or a ranker? So that if one person says, I didn't get any PPP money, and another person says, I got $50,000 of PPP money, does that make the one that didn't get any PPP money more ranked higher? So that
Yes.
I would look at their application first. That's the first,
So it's
Part.
it's the size of the deficit.
but then you need to be getting into looking at tax returns.
Yeah, I was
and
just gonna say that is
analyzing.
huge.
I don't think it's the size of the deficit,
It's-
because
that-
what about somebody who
that
lost
isn't
their
what the
job, who
requirements.
already, you know, I mean, there are certainly people who probably had a harder time, but that is not what we are in the business of evaluating.
So
This
I
is-
think we got
I
off our
don't think
6
we can,
categories.
this is
Yeah.
not like social
So let's go back.
services.
Sorry.
We're off our 6 categories, so.
Yeah, I
we
Well,
have-
no, I
we
think
have-
we
so we
have our
6 categories,
categories.
municipal's the last one, that includes the school. and I think
Right.
we're-
Does it, is it,
consensus.
does that include help school-aged children catch up on academics, or is
Yes.
that nonprofits too?
We know that one of the
Because
biggest
I don't
programs is gonna come
see
through KCS, and they're
helping-
already at the Board of Finance, and the Board of Selectmen.
I don't see
requests.
helping school children catch up on academics being a matter of municipal infrastructure.
Agreed. I think that's not.
I
No,
think
no, no,
that
so
goes into
municipal and
nonprofits.
So municipal infrastructure
No, they're,
and just municipal.
That's not, yeah, I don't think it's a useful distinction. I think municipal, when we're talking municipal, we're talking about outfitting town hall for hybrid meetings. We're talking about the tablets that P and Z asked for. We're talking about things that help the town to run the town, which is different from programming that the schools might have.
Okay, so. when we're
Which
talking-
is also different from infrastructure, because infrastructure might be fix the pool at Emery Park, make Kent Commons Center or Kent Common Parks better. I think of that as infrastructure investment versus municipal projects. I think there is a distinction, and that's why we agreed on the 6 categories last week.
Okay, so Emery Park would be infrastructure, even though it's the town.
Well, think
And
of it as capital
other
expenditure.
things would be
How does
municipal.
that fit into COVID?
Recreational facilities are
Oh,
actually delineated.
okay.
Well, except that,
And that's the feedback we get in a lot of the meetings. is-
Yeah, I just.
yeah, I just
again,
don't know that money from ARPA is gonna.
It's gonna,
fix
yeah,
any of
Emery
that.
Park.
Well, they
Yeah,
have,
Well,
especially
except for
when
that
there are capital
64.
plans and other.
So
just
the
seems-
infrastructure would be like hard assets and what would you could consider net
I,
capital expenditure.
you know what, I don't really think it matters as long as we
It does
know that
matter.
there's a category that we could assign the kinds of requests that we're getting to. So as long as we know that there'd be somewhere to put it, we might as well just decide on the name.
I'm just feeling like
Yeah.
there's so much that it's gonna be indistinguishable what we're giving some people for, if you're gonna be talking about these projects. I mean, it's
So
gonna
what-
be nothing.
they did,
That's right.
just to get back to your comment, Ruth, before, they did, in the final rule, they did include a lot of infrastructure improvement, eligible uses.
I'm not saying that it's not worthy. I'm saying the money we have
It's
to
just
split it out is gonna be, I mean,
We
we're
don't have
talking,
enough.
We do not have to allocate evenly across categories.
oh no, I
No, nobody
understand
wants
that.
Why I put 400,000 in individuals, because my personal opinion is we should exhaust the people who would apply to us before we start thinking about the big chunks that are gonna eat the
Right,
rest.
so just to finish our 6 categories, so infrastructure, which we agree is hard assets and whatever, but town hard assets, capital expenditures, that's the 5th category. And municipal, which we'll call a catch-all that includes the school, that would be the 6th category. And then we could start working back through. Do we agree?
Actually, can we,
Well, let's have a vote.
well,
We
I
can't
mean,
vote.
Why not?
yeah, because.
Because Joe has a question, and that is why we're not gonna vote,
I
we're
mean,
gonna
it-
hear him out.
How can you have a plan if you don't understand this format? First of all, I mean, you know, if we, there's 6 categories and there's things on here that I don't, you know, it's like the mental health
That's
portion.
now nonprofit. That went
That's
into
a nonprofit,
nonprofits. So D got wrapped into C.
Okay, so that could just be crossed off.
Essentially.
Or if you draw a circle around it and an arrow and move it into C. It's not that we're not considering that as something that is worthy of funding. We just think it belongs in the general category of award to nonprofits.
And this other part here, other infrastructure for future community resilience.
That's now called municipal/school.
Well, there's one here, it says municipal infrastructure. Wouldn't that be the
Cross the
same
word
thing?
That's now
Municipal.
called infrastructure.
Let's cross that word off. And cross this one off.
And
cross this
school-age
one off.
children goes into municipal/school. And on the second page, premium pay goes into businesses.
Okay, so then we have, starting with A, this would be residents.
Yep.
B would be businesses. C would be nonprofits.
Yep.
And then, let's
Fire
see,
department
all
and
right,
school.
volunteer fire department is
Yep.
its own category.
Yep.
Okay, so that's 4.
Yep.
And then 5, infrastructure.
Yep.
And then 6 is municipal.
Right.
Yes.
And that's it.
Okay, so we got our 5 categories on this
Six.
list, 6 categories, excuse me, right there.
Can we
Okay.
vote on that?
Now we're all on the same page, I
Or we
guess.
just have a
Do
consensus?
we actually need a vote?
No,
We're
we have a
solid on that.
consensus. Okay, well,
Okay.
okay, good.
Everyone's good. We're solid on that. So now comes the fun part of figuring out how to apportion the funding.
So, and I would just want to throw out, this will be like, this is preliminary, so people are gonna make their preliminary, and then we're gonna support, and then we're gonna reach a consensus. I think is that what we're trying to do?
Yeah.
Yes.
With the knowledge that, you know, of course, that even we don't make the decision, right? All we're really doing, our group will reach a consensus on what we want to strongly suggest that the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Finance do, and we want the tightest package because of that. But ultimately, it's not our decision.
Can I throw out some numbers here? Actually, so now that we have the categories,
Yeah.
I've been devouring the numbers here that Barbara, Patricia, and Connie put down on here. I'm sorry, I didn't do this before the meeting, but I just did it now, actually. So what I did was, for my numbers, I tried to take basically the average of what all three of you did. Just take the average. So what I did was, for residents, I put 246,855. That was my catch-all last part. That's 30% of the whole 821,000. For business, I put 200.
Hold on, so.
I put 200 for business.
Mhm.
Could be, put 200 for nonprofits. About in the middle. I kept the volunteer fire department 75,000. Just bumped it up a little bit. And municipal infrastructure was, basically 100. So I split that up. I just put municipal 50,000, infrastructure 50,000. I don't know if that's accurate or whatever, but what that comes to is very similar to what three other people in this committee did. So residents is 30% of all of it. Businesses is 24.3%, nonprofits 24.3%, Kent Volunteer Fire Department's 9.1%, and then 6% for municipal infrastructure.
And could you run down your numbers again for me for the minutes? 246 for individuals, 200 for businesses, 200 for nonprofits. What for volunteer fire department?
75,000 for the fire department,
Municipal,
50,000,
infrastructure.
and 50,000 there. Just splitting it down the middle, not even knowing.
Okay.
And to understand how you came up with your allocations, is essentially you're averaging the three that you had.
A general average, yeah. So,
But so I was thinking we were going to be supporting our own
well,
way of looking at it.
I
I
did
think at
that.
the end, that's the way to do
I
it.
did that for two reasons. Knowing what we know from the ARPA survey, knowing what we know from focus groups, and knowing what we know from being in these meetings
Mhm.
for quite a few months now. Three other committee members made these assessments based on those, and so did I, actually. I mean, I was actually going through my notes
This is
here. trying to
basically
figure out.
yours.
So, oh yeah, no, I actually agree quite a bit with the three other members here. Now, we could adjust these as we see fit here, but it seemed to me that seems pretty logical. Now, again, municipal versus infrastructure, I'm not quite sure about those. We just made that into two different categories.
Okay, so
But we could talk about that. So, but just as a general jumping point, if we can kind of agree that this is the general shape of where we're recommending money goes, can we agree on these 6 categories and roughly these numbers?
no,
And if we
we
can't,
have
then let's-
6
then let's-
categories, we're way
Let's
off on
hear
that.
from the rest of the committee about where they would put their numbers.
Yes,
and
exactly.
I could agree on the categories. I mean, I'm comfortable with that. This figure here for 70,071 for the fire department, how was that arrived at?
I utilized percentages and I actually took, if you go on the webs, on our shared drive, there's little notes in all my boxes. So if you hover over the box, you can read my note. They didn't print out on the paper. So I'd have to actually refresh and look at my notes to see how exactly I came up
We
with
could
that.
look
But
at-
I put notes in
We could
there.
look on my laptop
I'm not sure.
if it was, I don't know.
Okay, so there was a request that was submitted for 166,000,
Mhm,
I believe.
mhm.
That's not a valid request.
I didn't suggest it's not valid. I just suggested that request, this is how much of it I would recommend funding
Okay,
of it.
because I looked at that and I thought to myself, well, I don't want to second guess what they're asking for. So I came up with the figure that they requested.
But that's
Well, so
fine
then let's put that in the box for
For
what you
you.
think.
for your column. Put that, here's your column. And I-
But isn't that funny that 106 is what they're asking for the net budget request also? The exact same amount?
No, 106 is their standard grant that they get through the general fund budget. That's their standard
So
grant.
there's no ARPA request, there's just.
No, they
No, there's
did
an
make an
ARPA
ARPA
request.
request,
What
and
is
you
the-
can look at it and you
Yeah.
can see they actually were quite clear in talking about what the money would go for,
Right.
its
What's the
equipment,
dollar value
its,
of that?
$166.
166 from us specifically. or from like
Yeah, from
at the
ARPA.
end.
So to get to my number, I went through their list and I picked off a couple of things that I felt the ARPA money should go to, and that's how I came up with
and
that.
to get to my number, I thought that we should only look at it if we didn't run out of money in some of the other categories.
Okay,
So
well,
these
so-
are just, this is how different people are considering it, and you should, you know,
Absolutely.
if you think that the way to do it is to do what they asked for, then
Well-
that's what we'll put in your box.
So maybe we just go around and everyone just do like like the,
Well, that's what, I think that's what we're doing.
okay,
Yeah,
so,
go around.
So Joe, all right, so
I'm good.
you're done.
I'm good.
Joe, why don't you just. give us a summary?
Okay, well, as I say, I mean, I looked at that request, I said to myself, well, I don't want to second guess them because, you know, they know they need, so who am I to say that you don't need that much? Now, and another rationale for doing that is the population, all right, of Kent is 3,019 according to the 2020 census. So that would benefit the entire population of the town. Now, okay, so I would put that figure in for the Kent Volunteer Fire Department.
106 is the figure, Joe?
166, 166,
166, okay.
the request that they made. And I will, and thank you for taking the minutes to back me up, and I will fill the rubric in as well after the meeting.
Throw the what in?
I'm glad that we'll have this in double, but you should know that I will also fill this in. I will fill that rubric back in with. the new
Okay, okay.
meeting.
Do you want me to go with
Yes.
some of my other
Yeah.
ones that I
Yeah.
have? Now, let's see, small businesses. My approach for that one was that I took the request from the Chamber of Commerce, the $56,000, because they had lost, that sound, to my way of thinking, that sounds reasonable, a reasonable loss for their fundraisers.
That is a nonprofit, however. Chamber of Commerce is a nonprofit. It's not a business. So that's what they would apply under.
Well, I had, again, when I filled my information out, I couldn't match it with this chart here. So the Chamber of Commerce, all right, if you want to include that, then that $56,000 figure would have to go to nonprofits then. So what I did for the rest of the small businesses is I just utilized the ones that, I believe there were 4 businesses that requested funding. And I used those, and I came, including that Chamber of Commerce, which you're saying now doesn't go into that amount. I came up with a $96,000 figure for that category.
I think just because he did it that way, we should put 96,000 under businesses, because that was what he was thinking.
Yeah, I think that's fine.
Okay. Okay.
For nonprofits, I just took all the requests that were in there. The ones that were filled in on the spreadsheet, and totaled them all up, including the Kent enrichment program that they want to start. And what I did do, though, is I did not put down the full amount for the Housatonic counseling, Housatonic Youth Board. I put 20,000 figure for that because I had seen where other towns in the region are not giving that $60,000 full request. So I put 20,000 down for that, figuring that that 60,000, if other towns are not including or not having that same amount, then Kent would be paying a share that another town would be asking, in other words, paying another town's share. So I used a figure of 20,000 and then added up the other nonprofits that were in there. And I came out with like 93,000 estimate, a roughly figure for that. Individuals, I kind of had trouble with that category. I had the premium pay. I believe that amount was like 26,000 for individuals. I included that amount. And again, I had to include more. I really didn't have any information that I could use to add to that. So I kind of just left it, at that amount for now. Going on to municipal,
25.
So you put that at 20?
25, I put down
For residents.
25,000
Residents.
for
25.
individuals.
Okay, and businesses,
96,
96
and 93.
and 93. Okay,
That's
cool.
where he's at.
Municipal projects.
Mhm.
I took the amount for the, let's see, for the request from the Board of Selectmen for 24,000 for the improvement for hybrid technology. And I included the request for new laptops for one of the municipal boards. Coming out with, what did I get here? 34,000 for municipal projects. And then for infrastructure investments, I took the capital improvements for the park and rec amount of 75,000. And then added to that the sewer department request for improvements for sewer infrastructure. And then for that, I came out with I believe 132,783. And to add that all up, it comes out to 547,389.
Joe, how much did you put for municipals? I didn't get that one.
34.
34.
34,000.
Okay.
200 unallocated.
And then, as stated before, I put the full amount for the Kent Volunteer Fire Department, 166,000. And I believe and then there was a variable for the affordable housing. I wanted to include that also, but I had no figure to put that in there. So if we went to for the 150,000 amount, which was put in here, it comes out to a total of 713,489.
So you're saying you put like 100 into nonprofits for the affordable housing, is that?
That's
No,
where we'll put it.
Okay.
He didn't know what
But
category to
that's
throw
what
it in.
I just want to make sure that's what he was saying.
and so if you add all those things up, it comes up to 713,000
All right, then.
under the total amount for the 2-year.
Do you have a suggestion of what to do with the balance between the 80?
I was thinking just leaving it alone and then seeing what happens,
So as a reserve?
as a reserve. Yeah.
So what was the last one again? 132, 783 was infrastructure. What was your last one?
He was gonna add another
Hundred.
100 into,
For,
150?
yes,
but it really goes into
150,000.
nonprofits.
150 to nonprofits?
In addition to the 93, and that would be representative of his allocation towards affordable housing, the 150.
I see. Okay.
And that essentially is the plan that I came up, that I came out with. In fact, I kind of even broke that down to what I would like to see go to the first portion of payment, of the first tranche of funding, and what ones later on would would wait until the second
The
tranche.
second tranche is coming July of, or
Okay.
June
Yeah,
of
we
this
just-
year.
gonna-
So we're gonna get it in a month and a half,
Right, so all at once.
2 months. So we'll have all $800,000 in no time.
All right, let's do Craig and Ruth.
Ruth first.
I just go along with Glenn. I like, I'm pretty much leaning towards that. I think, although I probably, I'm pretty strong on nonprofits, so, but I do believe, individuals, I'd go about 250 on that. I'm not good at math, I'm going to tell you,
Yeah, that's
so
fine, go.
I'm not, it may not add
You
up
could actually
exactly,
put
yeah.
percentages- Percentages that add to one.
Yeah, businesses, 200. Nonprofits, I think I'd go probably 300 on there. Volunteer fire department, I go with 75. I think they're getting a lot in other budgets. And I have trouble with municipal and infrastructure. I'm just not sure about that. That just.
I think you're up to the limit.
You're already with.
I'm up to the limit anyway, so.
You spent all your money.
Oh, typical, 3, 5, 6, 7, yeah, so I'm good.
Okay.
So the rest in municipal or infrastructure. The rest of your, I think you're at
No,
37.
there is no the rest.
You-
No,
There's no the
no, the
rest.
rest, I spent all my money.
Nothing and nothing.
Okay.
I'm just.
So yes, you did. In fact, you spent a little more
Probably
than
more,
that.
which is, I mean, it's not that I don't think they're important, I'm just confused as to what would go under those categories, so.
Well, here's the thing too, is that if we over allocate for individuals, businesses, or nonprofits, if we don't get, I mean, the point is to be able to get everyone that needs it. And that's why, it makes sense to have a healthy allocation in there, and there may be overage, but what would be terrible is, 25,000 is only what the people that we've heard from so far. And if 264 people filled out our survey, but we've got 3,000 living in town, and out of 264 people, 611,000, almost $612 in losses was reported, then it's got to be more than that. And we may, even with these allocations, totally run out of money for individuals, businesses, and nonprofits.
Okay, I think we're off our
Your turn.
methodology. So, only 8% of our survey, so just to set the table, the only the interviews were really helpful and anecdotal information about specific individuals and creating perspective. But they're like any individual interview is not statistically significant in terms of trying to assess need. And really the surveys, which we're still, so we're at about 9% of town residents filled out the survey, which is actually a reasonably decent response. That's our most valuable piece of concrete information. And we want to have our allocation should be evidence-based and well supported. And if we got more, that's the focus groups for the social services, I thought were extremely helpful, and for the nonprofits, and for each individual, each one of them was helpful. But we don't have like a big picture across those groups. So I think the survey is really important. Is the
So
way I'm
you're
setting the
prefacing
table.
your allocation.
That the
Right.
survey is
Right.
really important because it's
Right,
our
we could,
actual
opinions might
evidence.
differ on what the
Personal biases
surveys,
are not actually.
what the
part of
surveys
that.
actually prove, because the survey has a lot of information in it, and I think we could go back and forth on what the survey really says.
But in terms of
and-
actual evidence, it's.
Our
Okay,
townspeople,
so what are your
our townspeople
allocations?
will have the results of the surveys too, and I think that's really important to remember, is that if our townspeople told us that there was, at least $611,000 of damage to individuals and businesses, and we are not responsive to that,
We're
that-
off again. You're
I think
preaching-
that, I just want to
you're
point
preaching
out
your
that
point.
if we're
Okay,
publishing that,
Craig, give us your numbers.
Okay, so the survey showed only 8% of survey respondents lost income.
Okay.
The federal programs to help people who are impacted by coronavirus were so substantial that it raised US net median income. It's been especially important being the incremental $2,400 a month in unemployment benefits. So residents have gotten a lot of help from the federal government. I don't think anyone could dispute that at all. The town of Kent has no demonstrated capacity to allocate money to individuals in need. So I think the best people to allocate to individuals in need would be nonprofits and the state. Because it's not something it's not a competency of the state of Connecticut, of this town of Kent.
Okay, so what are your numbers?
5% to residents.
Okay,
Which is what in dollars?
About
Give it to me in dollars so I can keep my.
I figured we're all doing percent because that's what we talked about. And
Yeah.
it's easier to get to a number that adds to one. 41, more or less.
it's 40,000.
40,000 to individuals for, again, with Kent businesses. Businesses also got a substantial amount of help from the federal government. We actually haven't had that much incoming from businesses. So I would also, and it's not something that showed up in the survey. It's especially important. So I would allocate 5% or about $40,000 to small businesses. Now, as we go through the application process, the people actually running the funding might find out the need is more than that, it could be adjusted. So nonprofits, yeah, so the nonprofits do have, we've talked about, the Kent Food Bank looks like it ran down its inventory to
Kent
some
Food Bank
extent.
is not an entity.
that's a municipal.
Oh, it's a municipal. Oh, that goes into there. Okay, that's important. So, so it's 10% into nonprofits, which would be about $80,000. The Kent Volunteer Fire Department, far and away the most important thing to survey respondents. I actually was allocating more than the request, but then I would also allocate their full request to 166,000.
I would encourage you also to watch all of the recent budget and Board of Selectmen meetings so that you have a full understanding of the budget and what the requests have been made to the town for the fire department. Just because it really helps to understand their request in the context of all of that.
Well, and I think it's important to, to the extent we had 8 to 9% of the town fill out a survey, overwhelming support.
Yeah,
for-
I'm
and
not
it's
making
obviously
I'm
COVID
actually
related.
not even making a statement here about
Mhm.
what our allocation should be. I want you to be aware, Craig, that there is a lot happening around the fire department in town right now, and it would be helpful to your understanding of it if you viewed the Board of Selectmen meetings.
Could I just,
But it would, it's not if the fire department needs a lot of money and.
Have you watched
ARPA
the
can supplement.
meetings?
I have, I've watched them.
Have you? Have you watched the
No, I
meetings?
have not. watched
Okay,
it.
so my suggestion is just that you watch the
I heard
meetings.
your
I'm not saying it should even change your opinion. I just really think that you should watch them. So that's
I-
all I'm saying.
All right, Joe, you
Could I,
wanted
could
to,
I just add something? I've watched the meetings, the Board of Selectmen meetings, and they have requested funding for staffing, if I've heard them correctly, and I think I have. It was a request for staffing. What they're asking for from ARPA funding is not anything to do with staffing.
My
Right.
point was just for Craig to be aware of what's going on in
Okay.
town,
Okay.
because
So
I
that
think
point's
it
made,
is
so we'll
really
continue.
hard sometimes to understand ARPA without the context of what our town's budget is for things like Park and Rec, like the fire department. So if you have a fuller understanding of that, I mean, now it makes it really easy to watch all of
Just say
those
point
things.
made, enough. Point made, okay, I will watch that.
Okay,
I-
good, thank
that's what
you.
want me to do,
That
I'll
was
do it.
my real, that
Okay.
was my point, but I had
We
a
agree.
feeling that it wasn't getting
All right,
across.
so infrastructure, my allocation is 35%, which works out to about 290.
What did you put for fire department, Craig?
$166,000.
Same as Joe.
Okay,
Municipal infrastructure, like some of the other towns, you get municipal, the scan, what do you call them, environmental scans of what other people are doing. Look like, some of the towns are doing like 2/3 into infrastructure. And the benefit of infrastructure is that it benefits everybody in the town. So it's extremely fair way to allocate it. And we don't get $800,000 lumps of money coming into the town very often. And it'd be nice to have an enduring positive impact on our town with these funds.
what kind of scam?
What Joe
Environmental
did.
scan is Connie's term for looking at what other people are doing or, well. what else is
It's a
going on.
tech term for
So
what
you want
other
the rest
towns
to
are
go to
doing.
Streetscape.
The streetscape's already funded. It's already funded,
Well, no, it's gonna have to go out to bond at some
Oh.
point.
right? And then the incremental cost of concrete versus asphalt. I don't think that we need to worry about
Let's
that.
not go there.
Yeah. So, all
Okay,
right.
so what
All right.
is infrastructure?
So my infrastructure is 290,000,
Right.
would be
And
about
then
35%.
municipal is-
Right, and municipal, excuse
it's
me.
what?
Municipal, would be the remainder is
290.
25%, and that works out to about 120. The percentages would have been, that makes it all.
Well, mine, I
almost
could,
almost.
I could,
Yeah, I can't,
Yeah,
we
change
can't
my
wait to
percentages.
sit here and do that later, I agree.
Yeah.
Where's the rest go?
I think that's supposed to add up to 100%.
40, 40, 80, 166, 290.
And
then
120.
And then 120 for municipal. And just as supporting on municipal, I do think that school programs are, anything that the schools can do, and more parks and rec, which would fit under municipal, so they would both be in there to encourage increased, make up socialization for children is incredibly important, and it'll help stave off some of the mental health issues that we also want to address through nonprofits.
Could we just go over like the two, on my part, for the small businesses and for the nonprofits, just for Patricia's sake, because this way here, when I was talking about them, the affordable housing was added on to the nonprofits and
no, I
the
left, we
chamber.
left it in business, and that's where you came up with the 96, right?
For the business,
That was Chamber of Commerce, we left in businesses in Joe's column.
Right.
And affordable housing,
Was put
we
under
put into
nonprofit.
nonprofits.
So your total
Nonprofits.
comes to 175,000 in nonprofits, Joe, if I'm reading it correctly.
I thought he was at 190.
193.
No,
Oh, I thought it was 150 and 25.
Because he initially had 93 and then we
It was
added
90.
100
I
for
thought we had
affordable housing.
150.
Yeah, we added,
we're keeping Chamber of Commerce.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah, it's confusing.
Just for starters.
okay.
All right, I guess it's
I
Patricia's
wrote down
turn.
90.
I have 93 plus 150 for Joe and nonprofits. Is that not correct?
Sorry, say it again.
93 plus 150 for affordable housing.
I'm
Okay,
sorry.
150.
That's my
That's
mistake.
So are we okay with our numbers? Because if we are, I mean, we're not, for the moment, okay. Because I'd like to point out New Milford for a second, if I can.
Yeah, no, it's like.
Okay.
Just say.
Please do. Please
So-
do.
So this is, and thank you, Barbara, you did all this, right?
No, Joe did
Joe.
Oh,
that.
Joe,
did all that.
thank you, Joe,
Yeah.
fantastic, this is great. I just looked at New Milford because it does a nice breakdown here of $3 million. So I tried to use the same categories that we have. And they don't quite match up, but of the 3 million, they're putting 1.2 million into repairing a reservoir dam at Reservoir Park.
Yeah,
Yep.
So infrastructure / municipal, whatever that is, but
And
definitely.
something that
infrastructure.
benefits everyone, right?
they blew
That's
a
where it's spending
huge
money
chunk of
there.
their budget on
Huge chunk.
repairing a dam, but that is also because they knew they had to repair a dam and they might
Sure.
not have had any other way of doing
Yeah.
it.
Yep. So that was a big part. The second biggest part was their emergency services, EMS operation manager, New Milford ambulance, New Milford fire marshal. That all comes to somewhere between 21 and 24%.
Mhm.
So emergency services are going up. Just look at the last Board of Selectmen budget meeting. And this is what New Milford's doing with their ARPA fund. Just to throw it out.
Yeah.
And then, business, they do have a line for business here. Theirs is 13%. By my numbers, I had 24%. Their nonprofits is somewhere around 6%. Whereas I had 24, we had 24. You had way more than that, 300,000. And residents, as far as I can see, with individual residents, I think it's
they
around
did anything.
6%, if that. mean,
I think it's
there's
very
rental assistance funds
interesting.
with that.
But also, I mean.
A lot
county
of
alone
towns did
doesn't
not
cost
approach
6%.
this from the standpoint of let's give back to our residents and our businesses. And that is a choice that they made, but that,
Yeah.
I think that
So,
our survey took us down another path. And with
Yeah.
our survey, we were following Sharon, and the town of Sharon is doing an application process.
sure.
So, I think you're right. I think some towns, they didn't even form a needs assessment committee.
True. I
Some
mean,
towns
looking at
just
all this-
decided to
Yeah.
spend it.
But again, that's looking, it's so hard, apples and oranges, because that's a city.
Exactly,
No, but-
exactly. But just interesting to
Yeah,
see.
no, it's
interesting
absolutely,
to see,
but I
you
just
know.
think that there are different perspectives.
But also interesting to see that, so even though there's, the money's going to different places, they're thinking similar categories, actually. I mean, there's nothing
Yeah,
so out of left
yeah,
field that
yeah,
I'm like,
yeah.
oh my gosh, we didn't think about that.
It's like the East
You
Windsor, or whatever the one we talked about, that was the only outlier where it's like, okay, it's all going to small business and send an application and done if I understood.
But I don't think,
All
no, they
their money.
didn't spend
Yeah.
Oh,
all
that's
of their
just
money.
money,
They
just some of
spent
it.
110,000, wasn't that right? I don't remember, but it wasn't, for a town of, like in East Windsor, they had to get a ton more. That's
Yeah.
just a small part of it.
Yeah, it's just one thing they did.
Sure.
It was the first thing they did to get the money out to the businesses immediately.
Yeah.
They created this erase grant program.
Which does, I know that we don't want to be around forever and ever, but that also seemed to be the temperature of our committee when we started feeling impatient, which was, let's get the money out to the businesses and people who really need it right away. So I think that's consistent too.
So we have our numbers.
Mhm.
We have other numbers, from other towns. So apples to oranges, perhaps.
And
Where do we go from here?
I wish we had
I mean,
like
we're-
an Excel spreadsheet where
I-
just like
I know,
throw it up on
we're
the
not-
wall,
we're
and
not-
like, okay, kind of where
We
we
can
are.
do that.
Yeah,
We
of
can
course.
do that.
No, I mean, I have the capability, if we want to do that at
Really?
our next meeting. I can
Yeah.
do that.
Okay, so let's do that at the next meeting.
Throw it up on the
Patricia
wall,
looks
we
like
can just sit
she's,
here and change numbers.
Change
real
things.
time.
I bet we're gonna, when we add up our numbers, like, we'll each be like a little bit off, but, so are we allowed to like reach a consensus on what people said via emails and stuff after Patricia first puts it together?
I
What?
don't think so. We're not
Can we-
allowed to email each other.
No, we can't have a discussion by email.
Cannot have a discussion,
cannot.
even
We
if it-
cannot. We can have
Okay.
another meeting if you want to meet within the week. you know, even if it was.
Ready? Let's go. Another meeting. Let's go.
But we can't have any discussion over email.
Okay, so can we start to have the discussion now?
About, say,
Well, so like, I think I'm an outlier on some of the things I allocated to, so you can ask me questions. And then
I think we know where you're coming from.
But so Connie, like, sorry, so the 48% individuals, I don't think it's really well supported by survey.
I'll tell you
results.
where I got it from.
I saw
I'll
that
tell you
you,
ex-
I saw that you have 80 people times 5,000. I don't know where you came up with 80 people, so.
Okay, so I'll tell you exactly where I came up with that number. So when I went to the 264 survey responses, you're right that many people in town, in fact, most said that they weren't harmed at all, but
Over 90%.
a subset did, and here's who did. 40 different people said that they lost $10,000 or more. That's $400,000 right there, just from 40 people. 15
Connie, that's businesses and people.
Right, so we can consider businesses and people here, right? We have no way, because our survey did not discriminate between those two groups. We have no way of knowing, is this a business or is this a person? Okay, so let's just take individuals, nonprofits, and businesses together as one lump. 40 responses lost 10,000 and up, that's 400,000. 15 responses lost between $5,000 and $10,000. That's another 112,500. 16 reported that they lost between $2,500 and $5,000. That's $60,000. 16 lost between $1,000 and $2,500. That's $28,000. And finally, 19 reported that they lost under $1,000, which is another $11,400. So total loss to those 80 survey responses, $611,900. I got the impression at our meeting last week that fully repairing all individuals at a level above $10,000 was not palatable to this committee. In fact, we were only discussing aid to individuals up to like 5,000. But you can see that what I did is estimate that if we had 264 responses here and we have a community that is much larger, that we could anticipate that perhaps 80 people might make a claim of up to 5,000 each. And that is where I came up to my number, because I said, let's try to serve everyone who was harmed at least $5,000 worth. And if we don't get that amount, let's kick it into another category. And I did the same with the businesses and the nonprofits. I think we should reserve a certain amount to help up to a certain amount of applications. And if we've got left over, then we can apply to some of these other really worthy categories. But I just still very much feel that repairing our community should come first.
Well, but what if someone earns $400,000 a year and lost $12,000 during the pandemic, and their income was down to $388 or $288? Would you want to repair and restore that?
I would. I'm not in the job of deciding who's deserving. I don't know what that person's bills are like. I don't know if they're hurt. I wouldn't want them to, have their house foreclosed upon just because they were missing. And, I don't think that it's really up to us to decide. I do not feel like I am that person's judger. It doesn't feel right to say, we're only going to help people under a certain net worth. It doesn't feel right to my community.
So it's feel right. So let's say I walk. So let's say you're going to be the allocator, Barbara, right? And you're like,
Magic wand.
Tell you.
Ready.
I lost more than $10,000.
Okay.
Wouldn't you want to know why?
Well, that's what that application will do.
Why you lost it? So let's
It'll-
say, I
the
lost
application-
1.1 million because the stock market went down.
Okay, but
Like,
the application
then some-
doesn't
you
have
know,
a
like,
category
why
for
are
the
we gonna help
stock
somebody
market.
with-
It's
like
lost
that.
wages and it's increased expenses
But
due
you
to
want to know why.
COVID.
what-
And the
you need to know
application,
what
as
the
Barbara
real
said,
need is.
has that.
And I think Patricia's like, if somebody 388, you
Okay,
know,
but-
$400,000 income, over time, they're gonna be fine. I don't think that our town taxpayers should be allocating.
Our
Through that
taxpayers
pushback.
aren't paying for this. This is ARPA money. It's not our tax
It's
dollars.
it is, it's our money that's just like recirculating back to us. It is our taxpayers' money. It's taxpayer money. All money that comes from the government is taxpayer money. Yes,
All
sorry.
I
I'm
want to
terrible.
say that I'm in Ruth's boat as far as I truly believe that if someone who makes that kind of money doesn't need ARPA money, they're not going to apply.
The public companies were asking for PPP.
But
And
we
they
don't
might
have
need
public
it.
companies coming to us.
Multi-billion
We're
dollar
dealing with our
capitals
own
were asking for
citizens.
it. So
And I truly believe that our friends and neighbors are honest and good people.
But they also might have just define things differently. So let's say.
Then they're
let me give
entitled
an
to
example. So
define things.
And what
Our
if you,
survey-
what if you
So
were
what?
somebody who made $20,000 a year and you didn't put a claim in because it's just not you?
that's fine. That's a good.
Are we gonna
American
chase those
Yankee
people down
positive
because they
attitude.
really deserve it?
No,
It's not up
that
to
that
us.
guy is.
We need to make as fair
an
of an
American who doesn't
application
want help.
process
He's
as
independent,
possible
and
and
you should
trust
respect that.
our process.
I actually don't think we're going to be getting a lot more requests. Well.
Joe, we are gonna get so many more
Well,
requests
here-
than what
here-
is in Barbara's table.
here's-
Because we have not had an application process. We have not, in fact, we've told people not to apply.
Well, here's why I
And
say
they've still
that.
sent us their stuff.
Here's why I say that, is because I went to the annual report for the one they put out for January 2022. And anyhow, I looked up in there for like what they had under the heading of social services. And when Leah Polero was here and she submitted the form and it gives a breakdown for how much they spent for aiding the community. And anyhow, for the food bank, it lists, I believe, 36 adults, 21 children, and so many seniors, 18, I believe it said. So those aren't really big numbers. So going on, and I saw that and then I said to myself, well, if that's the number of people that are applying for aid, I don't think that there's going to be a
Do you
big
have any
swarm.
idea of how many people aren't coming there who need it?
Why wouldn't they?
Or how many
Because they
people
don't.
ate
People are
rice?
proud. People don't come here for help. We know, I can tell you,
Well, if they deserve it, I don't,
They-
well, I believe you, but
they
I mean, if
don't.
they deserve it, I
We,
don't understand why they don't.
there are,
They just
people are too proud. They will not come for help unless they are on death's door or, they have some catastrophic, something
What about
happen.
things that you couldn't get for social services? What
And-
about,
and-
what about like deferred medical procedures that would be really needed and necessary to quality of life that people didn't do because they couldn't pay their medical
And
bills
they had,
last
but they
year?
had healthcare insurance, and so it's
No,
deferred, and their life
Not
isn't
all of them had
Not all.
healthcare insurance. I know
And-
that.
And the town budget for the social services is very deceiving. Because the community fund
Yeah, right.
does a tremendous amount of extra work for
That's
that.
why I wanted to give more money to the community fund. She said you didn't want it.
We're not-
Anyway, there's no way of knowing.
But we're getting our own private
Right,
money.
of course,
so-
that's fine.
But, which is fine, and it'll be
It's some of
dispersed
the
this
people
way.
that
There's
need
no way of
money,
knowing
you know,
how
they
many
might have-
applications
they're getting
But-
help
but,
from
you know,
relatives or other
Folks,
ways.
we're all coming at this with our own philosophical ideas and agendas, and hopefully we can come to some consensus.
Right, of course.
It's not, to me, it's not just surveys and it's not just focus groups. I know people, we all know people who aren't on this represented here. And that's where our thoughts are coming
Individuals.
from, are individuals.
Well, that's why I think the nonprofits are like you guys have the skills
not-
to
Not all
find
the
those individuals
nonprofits are
and
gonna
help them, and
address
our
this
town
though.
doesn't have those
Craig,
skills.
knowing the nonprofits in town, not all of the nonprofits are going to address this. You know, I don't know that they're,
That's not what I said. I didn't say every nonprofit, but
well, but you're not gonna solve
the
for all
town
the
is
people in the
incompetent. The town
residents
has no
category by just giving
demonstrated
more
capacity
money.
to go out and find individuals in need and help them.
There's never been
It-
an
it-
ARPA disbursement before.
But the nonprofits do know how to do that, and so like, they're in a good position to do it. The town's incompetent.
They don't. The nonprofits are giving out, you know, based on their own criteria developed over time with really scarce resources. The nonprofits have never been given $800,000 that
They're
they
not gonna
can
get
just
$800,000
give.
now. They're gonna get a bump in their, what they already
And
have.
anyway, nobody has more or less capacity is what
So-
I think. And I think that if Barbara is talking about her own capacity to do this, then I think it's worth trusting her. It's
And I'm
worth
not
trusting
saying
her
Barbara's
opinion
wonderful.
on
I
what
have no
she's able to
reason
do.
to doubt Barbara's talents at anything. It's just, she hasn't been, you haven't been a social services director or.
She doesn't have to
done-
be to do this application.
No. So I'll give you a point, and because you started talking about survey results and, you know, incurring a loss, and, you know, one of the survey questions, you know, is like would cause laughter and like a statistical study review, where it's like, if you answer yes to this question, you might get money. I think it's actually the last question on the survey. It's like comically poor survey design. But like, if you, it's because then everyone's gonna like, oh, if I say yes, I might get money. Like,
Except they
that's
didn't.
hilarious. It's
And which
so
proves
poor.
Ruth's point.
But then
because
I was still talking.
Of
you
two
interrupt me a
hundred and
lot,
sixty-four,
Connie. I
only
interrupt other
80
people,
people,
I
well, because
I
you're just,
appreciate-
you're
Nope, you're
undercutting your
interrupting me.
argument.
So anyway, so you're saying, you're talking about people who have $10,000 in need, and that comes through in the survey, but you don't know how that's defined, and everyone's gonna define it differently. And I'll give an example where, you know, the grocery store is actually not asking for money, and it seems like, you know, the guy was, you know, it's a really helpful thing, but he could, if it was a less, not scrupulous, but just a guy who's, you know, he's looking to find where he lost money, you could say, and he's not, he seems like a wonderful guy, who's not even asking for help, but he could say, well, I spent $10,000 on plexiglass screens, and so I had a $10,000 loss on that, which is nothing. But, and forget the fact that his sales went up by some percent, right? So he's a good guy, but someone else could say, yeah, I had a $10,000 loss. Why'd you lose $10,000? Well, I had to go buy these plastic shields. And if you don't ask any other questions, you don't realize that the guy actually didn't, you know, net have a loss, and you're allocating
But
money
this is not
to
social
someone who doesn't need
services.
it, which means you're allocating less money to people who actually do.
I would give it to that person, just the same as I would give
Well,
it to
that is
any other.
nonsense.
It's
That is
not
nonsense.
nonsense. It's the point of this
If
funding
somebody's
is to
revenues went up,
address
Their employees' revenues
expenses.
went up, their sales are up.
So
net,
not
the guy's
everyone's gonna
fine.
ask.
You don't just write him a check. He's
I
already
would.
covered it himself, and he's responsible, and he wouldn't ask for money.
I would write that check.
But
That's
you-
what I
you
think
need to
this
know
money
how that
is
loss
for,
is
to
defined,
address.
So you can understand that.
It's not
It
address
seems like you
net
would write a lot
loss.
of checks.
I would write a lot of checks. That's why you see my numbers being the way that they
Well,
are.
but you came into, in the last meeting, you were saying, you know, your personal bias is just to give money to people. And I don't think that's what we're.
No, my personal
And I don't think we're
bias.
asked to come in this
No,
with a
let me
personal
let me
bias.
restate that for the record.
Hmm?
I believe that the ARPA funds are being distributed to towns so that they can address losses and
Real
increased.
losses.
Nope, not net losses, losses and increased expenses that were experienced by our townspeople and our businesses. And that is why I personally feel that those categories should be compensated first. And the reason that I believe that it is not about net loss is that if you take a store that might have had to erect plexiglass, where revenues went up because people were shopping locally during during COVID, excuse me, that they still had to put up those plexiglass. The plexiglass was not the driver of the increased revenues. So had they not had those expenses, they would have had even higher revenues.
All right, so is there?
So it's still a loss.
No, so he actually, he's net better off. And we're just, you know, again, he's a great guy. we're just using an example.
I'm just
It's not-
using a store. I'm
But
not personalizing
He's
it.
net better off, and you're saying, well, he's net better off, this guy's fine, he's actually, his net worth increased during Corona, but you know what we're gonna do? We're gonna borrow from our children, our grandchildren, and our great-grandchildren to pay him for a non-existent lot. Like,
I
he didn't
never said
actually
we were
lose
gonna
money.
borrow
And
from
we
our
only
children.
have $800,000, so we're taking money away from somebody who actually has need to give it to someone who doesn't, and you're like, well, it's just as, it seems
No,
like.
I'm saying we
that
should give everyone
willy-nilly
who
is
has
not the way to
need
go.
to our capacity to do so. So that's what
Right,
I'm
so Kent
saying.
doesn't have the capacity.
Put
to do it.
Everyone, hold on, it's a conversation of a committee, not two people. The definition of a loss is not the definition of hardship. So I don't think if you have $10,000 and you have a choice of giving it to Kent Singers, a wonderful choral group that desperately needs some support, or someone who earns $400,000 and only earned $390, I think the choice is obvious. Kent Singers, not I think that we have to be cognizant of hardship. Over 90% of respondents say they had no loss of income. And we have no way to determine if those that did acknowledge some loss, whether it really caused any sort of hardship or difference or real problem in their life. So I think to just say anyone who experienced a loss, we're gonna repair that loss is not really nuanced enough to address some real pressing issues that we have culturally with our nonprofits, environmentally, educationally, mental health. I just find that it's too broad brush of a point of view, and that's why I personally can't buy into it.
I can't believe Tricia and I agree about that.
Well, okay, so now that we've all put our numbers in and everything, so before this advisory report is issued, where do we go from here?
Barbara,
I think, just to back up just a teeny bit, that we should come to some consensus on these numbers. So I'm suggesting that I'll go back and I'll populate this spreadsheet all the way out, and we'll take an average across the categories and come up with some better numbers that is a culmination of all of our numbers together, right? So we average each category based on what we all said to start with. Secondarily, I think the issues that we are discussing right now about who's going to qualify and who isn't going to qualify can be addressed on the application process very simply. I need to put a little more thought into how, but I think that can happen. And I don't think we need to get into the weeds, personal opinion, of looking at tax returns and making people prove what their bank account says. I don't think that's necessary, but I do think that your concern about giving money to people that don't, let me rephrase
had a
that.
loss,
Giving
but not
money
partial.
to people when there may be other people who have a bigger need can be addressed through this process.
okay, so I think that is a good idea. And I think that we should run with that. And I think the only thing that I would like to put out there for our thoughts in a subsequent meeting is, how do we solve for if we come up with a system that we think is really good for making sure that funds go to people who really did experience a loss.
Hardship,
I'm not ready to go that far yet.
okay?
Okay,
I think
but
that's
if
a
we come
important
up with a
point.
way that we feel really comfortable with, of understanding people that really need it,
Mhm, mhm.
how do we make sure that we can fund the universe of that? If we find out that 300 people really need $5,000, how are we gonna figure that out when we don't even have, like, I mean, what are we gonna do if we find out the need is much more voluminous than we assumed?
I think one of the ways we can address that in our recommendation is to do the application process in 2 or 3 different waves. The first wave will be individual businesses and nonprofits so that they get addressed immediately. And the second wave will be the other categories. And that way, to address that concern, if we have every household in town in one capacity or another that fits into those categories, submit an application, and they, through our application process, are worthy, then we will know that that we can make that recommendation that money be moved into those categories. That's one way.
I like that.
I think it's solid.
Yeah, I like that.
So if they don't get in on the first tranche of funds, their application is retained for then when the next tranche comes in to be considered. Is that what?
I think we can take all the applications at the same time because the money in the second tranche is coming in so soon that, we'll just get the application process once, get enough allocations to satisfy the entire.
Gotta streamline it, or you'll go.
Yeah, well, like Litchfield had a window.
Yeah.
So and then just to be sure, so like, because it sounds like we're gonna move to like, it sounds like we're gonna move to like an average across these and then kind of.
But I think there's wiggle room,
I think we can see what it
I-
looks
I-
like and then we
yeah.
can fine tune it.
I mean, I can see changing some things. I mean, I think once we see it out there.
And not to put a can of words, but like, like allocating 0 to infrastructure, like when clearly, at least in part, that's what our survey respondents want, is something specifically designated as a use for ARPA funds, is incomprehensible to me. And then that's gonna throw the percentages
So
off.
here I'll.
But it needs to be supported in some way.
Here's one way to understand that. There have been 6 or more surveys recently that are asking very similar questions, including the POCD survey with the answers to which I carry around with me. And the comments and the desires of our town expressed in the POCD survey and in other surveys mirror what we found in our survey. That our townspeople, regardless of where the money comes from, they want better recreational opportunities. They want better infrastructure in terms of high-speed internet. So those things scored high because people in our town need and want them.
So
It's
why wouldn't you
not
allocate to them?
necessarily what they want with ARPA funding, although it could be. But my personal view is that the town's got to do something about those regardless of ARPA. And so I do think that absent the display of need that may or may not be there, that those sorts of projects could be funded with ARPA. But I think the town's got to find some way to address
Yeah,
them.
And that can be
whether or
in the
not ARPA.
recommendation too, if we end up allocating, just using Connie's number, $400,000 to residents, and we don't get applications to support disbursement of that funding, that would automatically go.
Okay,
to-
so having a catch-all is a great idea.
Yeah.
Okay.
I actually think we can do both. I mean, depending on what the numbers are, I actually think you can do both. If you do it correctly.
I am not against infrastructure, and I just don't see. It's just such a small portion
Right.
of such a huge projects that we have to undertake. That's my
So right,
concern.
$100,000 for Parks and Rec, and it's gonna do some good, and $100,000 to, and I'm not gonna advocate the SOAR program, but it sounds cool, and it's not, but $100,000 to jumpstart that program could do a lot of good for a long time if
To
that.
jumpstart, I'm sorry.
The SOAR program, and I'm just. using
SOAR.
an
Oh,
example,
see,
that's
I don't
I
see
thought
that
you
as
said sewer.
infrastructure.
cool.
I
No,
don't
I'm
know.
saying,
Or municipal, or I
but
just.
some, but
Can
Okay.
I-
we have.
One thing that bothers me, guys, one thing that bothers
Hold
me.
on one
Anything
second,
in case it has to
Patricia,
be
I'll-
municipal.
Okay,
But it is
see, I
something
see,
that you
I'm
start a
con-
program and you can have a
confused
long
about
lasting.
municipal and, I don't know.
Positive effect.
School is municipal, you say?
Municipal.
Okay, so let's let Patricia speak.
What can, I had one thing that kind of bothers me is that we aren't making any specific recommendations. And I think that our charge kind of, at least for me, it feels incomplete without some very specific recommendations. For example, the vast majority of respondents were seniors. The big majority of townspeople are age 50 and over. I would like to recommend something like spend X number of dollars to improve the senior center, to bring in decent programming, to invest dollars in our seniors and at the senior center. And with the way this is going, I can't make that recommendation. We can't make that recommendation. And I think that that would be a real shortfall of our report if we can't do that.
I think we're gonna get, so you're right. I think we're just trying to allocate to the categories and then we'll make specific
No,
recommendations.
but I kind of asked that question earlier and was told, no, we're just gonna allocate the categories and then ask for applications.
I think you're absolutely right. I think somewhere in this, we have to, we've been doing this, we, months and months, and you have to come up with some.
Mhm.
Yeah, otherwise, we look
Other
like
categories.
it took us forever to do not much of anything.
So I don't understand though. I also think that our town needs a vibrant senior center. I'm just not sure that allocating a portion of money to it is what makes it happen. And I don't think that ARPA is the answer because ARPA is one-time funding. So I think that is
But-
like to the extent that at the
but I-
end of our report, we say, listen, we heard this in the survey and we really think these are strong needs for the town because that is what might help drive the applications from nonprofits and from, that is the kind of thing that might get us the development of programs that we think will make a real difference.
Well, they have that position that they're, that social service position that haven't been hired yet, but once they're hired, they're supposed to be responsible for the senior center, senior activities.
So
My
I
understanding.
think that, as part of this process, we can get to the point where say the senior centers should get X
Yeah,
dollars.
I think that should be part of this. I think you're absolutely right. We have to say something. We have categories and these are our recommendations. I don't see why we can't
Yeah,
just say
but
that.
I think
These are what we feel are important under,
since we're coming up on 2 hours, so
Yeah, I got it.
why don't we do this?
Yeah,
We'll come up with this, everybody put their spreadsheets together. We'll
Well,
reach our consensus on the
Yeah.
categories and then we'll start
She's gonna-
going through the
she's
categories.
gonna. because-
What are we
You
doing
wanna
for
do
the
that?
next?
Overall math lesson?
By math lesson, yeah.
Okay. Patricia, did you have something more to say?
Yeah, I wasn't sure what we're supposed to do for the next meeting.
Wait for Barbara to do her spreadsheet and.
I think in the meantime, you can think about what specific allocations you'd like to make
Yeah.
within these 6
Within the
categories.
categories. I think that's
Exactly.
excellent idea,
Yeah,
Patricia.
okay, that's a good.
Yes.
Good.
Yes, because somewhere we have to tell them what we think is important, yeah. Yeah,
Okay, so I'm gonna change up our spreadsheet a little bit, put the averages in of the numbers that we came up with, and then we'll all come back with specific allocations for each category.
Okay, so it is, I
Okay.
can't read that because my eyes are bad. 6:22.
oh, man.
We will adjourn the meeting at 6:22. Thank you very much.